It started as just another day for investigative journalist Malik Hayes. Armed with his camera and a passion for uncovering the truth, he found himself reporting on a quiet street when two police officers approached. Their tone was sharp, their intentions clear. They weren't happy to see him there. Malik's heart raced as their questions turned into accusations. The tension was undeniable, but Malik wasn't about to back down. What these officers didn't know was that Malik had been recording everything from the moment they arrived. The evidence he held could change the narrative entirely, but would they even give him a chance to explain? As the situation escalated, the line between authority and abuse blurred. What happens when the truth finally comes to light? Stay tuned as we uncover this intense and eye-opening story. Malik's mind raced as the officers demanded to know why he was there. He calmly explained he was a journalist covering a local story, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Instead, they questioned his credentials, his intentions, and even his right to be on public property. Their voices grew louder, and so did the tension. Malik couldn't ignore the uneasy looks from neighbors watching through their windows, some even stepping outside to see what was happening. He'd faced uncomfortable situations before, but this felt different, personal. Despite the officers' intimidating behavior, Malik knew he couldn't lose his composure. What they didn't realize was that his camera wasn't just hanging around his neck. It was on, capturing every word, every action. He stood firm, knowing the truth was on his side. But would that be enough to stop what was coming next? As Malik stood his ground, one of the officers reached for his notepad, scribbling something down while the other kept a sharp eye on him. "Let's see some ID," one of them barked. Malik calmly handed over his press badge, but the officer barely glanced at it before dismissing it with a scoff. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, shaking his head. Malik could feel the weight of the moment growing heavier. The neighbors watching from the sidelines murmured among themselves, but no one stepped forward. His heart pounded, but he knew this wasn't the time to panic. "What are you hiding?" the other officer demanded, stepping closer. Malik took a deep breath and pointed to his camera. "You might want to check this before jumping to conclusions." For a brief second, the officer hesitated, but the tension didn't ease. The officers exchanged a quick glance, their confidence faltering for just a moment. One of them leaned in toward the camera, clearly suspicious but unwilling to acknowledge the weight of Malik's evidence. "Turn it off," he said coldly, but Malik shook his head. "I'm within my rights to record in public. This is all documented," he replied, his voice steady but firm. The officer's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that," he muttered, signaling to his partner. Malik's heart pounded, but he refused to let fear show. Around them, the crowd grew, whispers turning into hushed outrage. People were recording now, their phones aimed at the unfolding scene. Malik could sense the balance shifting. The officers, once so sure of their authority, were becoming increasingly aware of the eyes on them. But would they double down or back off? The answer was just seconds away. The officers exchanged a quick glance, their confidence faltering for just a moment. One of them leaned in toward the camera, clearly suspicious but unwilling to acknowledge the weight of Malik's evidence. "Turn it off," he said coldly, but Malik shook his head. "I'm within my rights to record in public. This is all documented," he replied, his voice steady but firm. The officer's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that," he muttered, signaling to his partner. Malik's heart pounded, but he refused to let fear show. Around them, the crowd grew, whispers turning into hushed outrage. People were recording now, their phones aimed at the unfolding scene. Malik could sense the balance shifting. The officers, once so sure of their authority, were becoming increasingly aware of the eyes on them. But would they double down or back off? The answer was just seconds away. As the tension hung in the air, one of the officers reached for his radio, calling in for backup. Malik could feel the situation spiraling further out of control. The small crowd that had gathered grew bolder, murmurs turning into scattered shouts of support for Malik. "Leave him alone. He hasn't done anything," someone yelled, breaking the silence. The officers turned sharply toward the voice, their frustration mounting. But then something unexpected happened. From the crowd, an older woman stepped forward, her phone in hand. "I've been recording this whole time," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. Her presence shifted the atmosphere, catching even Malik off guard. The officers froze, their eyes darting between Malik, the woman, and the onlookers. For the first time, doubt flickered in their expressions, but instead of backing down, one officer squared his shoulders, as if ready to escalate further. The crowd waited in breathless anticipation, the tension at its peak. The officer glanced at his partner, as if weighing their next move. "Let's see what's on the camera," he finally said, his tone sharp. Malik didn't flinch as he handed it over, the small crowd growing silent. The officer played back the footage, and as the recordings revealed their aggressive behavior from the start, their confidence visibly crumbled. But just as the tension seemed to ease, another officer arrived on the scene, responding to the earlier call for backup. This new officer scanned the situation, took one look at the camera footage, and froze. He recognized Malik. "Wait," he said, stepping between them, "I know him. He's an award-winning journalist. What's going on here?" The crowd murmured in shock, and the two officers looked cornered. Before they could respond, the older woman stepped closer, phone still raised. "We all know what's going on here," she said firmly. The backup officer nodded grimly, signaling the original two to step back. As the situation diffused, Malik stood tall, the support of the crowd behind him. But just as he thought it was over, the woman lowered her phone and whispered, "This isn't the first time they've done this." Malik's eyes widened. His story wasn't over. It was just beginning. As the officers reluctantly retreated, the crowd began to disperse, but the energy lingered. Malik thanked the woman for stepping forward, her courage adding weight to his own. "They've been harassing people like this for years," she said quietly, her eyes full of frustration and determination. Malik nodded, realizing the depth of the story he'd uncovered. Later, back at his desk, Malik reviewed the footage. Every detail, every word captured told a bigger story than he had anticipated. This wasn't just about him. It was about a pattern of unchecked behavior. He uploaded the video with the evidence and the voices of the witnesses, ensuring the truth couldn't be ignored. The story sparked a wave of outrage and conversations about accountability. Malik's work wasn't just a report, it became a call for justice, proving the power of truth and community.